Here we have the reproduction of a drawing by Laszlo Varga. I have had this image in mind from the very beginning of the concept of Futuroma, partly because of its associations with Italian futurism, a kind of futurism which is now kind of a bit antiquated, but that juxtaposition of the future being described within the past is key within the exhibition. We were unable to obtain the image from the Museum of Ethnography in Hungary. Various pieces of red tape meant it just wasn't possible to have the actual drawing. So because we can't have the actual piece here, I've decided to make a postcard of it and disseminate it as widely as possible. So it's produced as a postcard, so people can put a stamp on, write an address, and send this image throughout the world. So this is an example of kind of an emancipation of the art object, in a way freeing Roma cultural capital from the many compromised places that it currently exists within. Here we have two more works by Kerry, again very domestic scale, looking at the idea of the domestic ornament, as I said, very prized within not just Roma homes, but particularly within Roma homes, I feel. This is a piece of work by Berkey. Again, we're brought back to the domestic here. These pieces of knitting were made by Celia over a period of maybe 2 years, basically as a therapeutic exercise to deal with some issues around anxiety. Me and my family encouraged her to take up knitting again, which she'd done when she was much younger. I mean, at this time her hands were quite debilitated with arthritis, so knitting wasn't that easy for her, but she persevered. And that's why we can see there are very many kind of holes and mistakes in the knitting. So this, as I said, this occurred over a number of years. Celia was my mother, and what began to emerge was this compelling outpouring of productivity. And this speaks to me very strongly of Roma productivity, Roma industry. We're often described as people that are not productive, which is certainly not the case. This speaks to me of a kind of a hyper-productivity, high creative impact, exuberance, a very strong life force. And this is contrasted very well with the work of Alfred Ulrich. Again, we have this kind of very strong sense of life force, a very vertical, kind of forceful motif in this work by Alfred, which is very powerful. And a lot of his work, as far as I'm aware, deals very much with the trauma that his family experienced during the Holocaust. And I think those elements of trauma and reparation are very apparent within the works. So the scale of these two pieces, I think, bounce off each other to create a very powerful synergy. And in the corner over here, we have two more works by Marcus Gunnar Pedersen. Again, these are working drawings, so they're performing many functions. And he's bringing together a number of disparate elements, abject objects, which are brought together. If you look carefully, they form two dogs' heads. I mean, it's kind of an optical illusion, and that's something I'm very interested in as well, this idea of how space is concocted in two dimensions, because it has associations with how we as Roma are given an imaginary space to inhabit. So ideas of the optical illusion and creating space from nothing is a fascinating proposition for me. So this is quite a small room, but very powerfully packed with fantastic works, as throughout the show. And here we have a virtual work by Selma Salman titled No Space. It's an augmented reality piece, and it speaks about the concept of space in a very general way within the work. Very powerful piece. It can be accessed via the QR code here and also via the website nospaceproject.com. Here we have two more works by Selma Salman. This piece of painting on metal, which is very dear to my heart, as it depicts Selma and two members of the family breaking up a van in order to sell for scrap metal. My father was a scrap metal dealer, so I'm very kind of familiar with this kind of economy, this kind of activity, basically taking that which is abject and rejected by society and turning it into something of value to society. So again, the idea of Roma industry is very much caught up in this painting. So apart from the subject matter, I think the way it's been executed is innovative and compelling. So a lovely piece of work. Here we have Salman in performance. I believe this is in The Hague, and she's breaking up a washing machine. And here, the composition of the image combined with the activity that's going on, the diaphanous nature of the dress, the hard metal of the washing machine and the axe create a compelling combination. Very dynamic work. And here we have another work by Kerry. Again, this one is drawing upon the domestic ornament, but in a much more kind of violent and visceral way. It's more directly echoing the internal workings of the human body. So again, this idea of the abject and the desirable are brought together in a very compelling set of arguments, I feel. And the whiteness of Kerry's work is a good juxtaposition with Valerie Leroux's photograph of a Roma internment camp in France in the Second World War. So the abandoned site has really been consumed by the vegetation and the undergrowth. In a way, nature is reclaiming the space. It's not obliterating it, but it's kind of absorbing it. So again, this brings up questions of how we deal with our past, how trauma can perhaps be dealt with in different ways, possible ideas of reparation, but the idea that the primeval aspects are really reclaiming this site of atrocity is a compelling argument for me. And here we have a work by Yuri Onov. This is very interesting for me because it deals with the macro and the micro. The macro and the micro. Essentially, what we have here is a traditional still life within the European art canon, but he's transformed it into something interstellar, something intergalactic, a kind of set of jostling planets which we are presented with. So he's inviting us to look at the everyday. He's inviting us to look at the everyday object through a very different lens and taking us to somewhere completely different. So the works of Futuroma are here. They're slightly different configuration than they were in Venice. The main focus are the plants that are growing to form traditional Romani medicines. Dan's idea is that Roma homes can be converted using green roofs, i.e. these plants will be grown on the roofs of Roma homes, then processed in order to be made into usable medicines and then sold. So this idea of an economy which is green, which is beneficial health-wise, is a very kind of utopian and very contemporary take on the idea of Roma productivity and the idea of Roma knowledge. The images of the Roma homes that Dan describes with the green roofs are put together here in collage and printed onto this voile, this kind of curtain fabric. So the image emulates the interior of the Roma home, whereby the windows are often covered with a kind of translucent fabric which you can see out through, but you can't see in through. Therefore, echoing this idea of the very private Roma space. And again, we're looking at ideas of domesticity in the domestic space here as well. Here we have some packs of wildflower seeds that the visitors can take away with them and plant wherever they like to continue the Futuroma ethos. The final work in the show is by an artist called Berkey, and here he presents us with a collage with many images of people, many images of natural phenomena. The work is titled Where We Came From and Where We Are Going, so it very eloquently encapsulates the whole ethos of the exhibition. The idea that by looking back, we can make sense of where we are going, and through combining the two, we navigate our space in the here and now. The work is a very fitting end to the exhibition.